have surgery, but two kinds of surgery. So he had one on Wednesday.
When I was very interested, that was like 3 years ago. When I was very interested in pursuing, like learning QHHT. There was no BQH back then. And I would consult Pamela. I've been so much interested in becoming a QHHT practitioner. What do you think? I'm so passionate. I've been following QHHT practitioners' YouTube videos. I will consult her. She's the one told me, how much is that? I said, this much, and the course 1 and 2 and 3. You don't need that. You are a shaman. You have to remember that. You don't have to pay thousands of dollars to learn this method. But now everything came to me. I was waiting for this BQH.
Yeah. Yes, that's great. That's perfect. I love that so much. That sounds absolutely correct to me.
Yes, I'm so happy. I was so happy. Thank you so much, Candace. But let's do the interview now.
Let's do the interview now.
Okay, so now this is going to be on the video, on the live. I mean, it's not live, but it's going to.
I understand.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Keiko, also known as K.Angel. How are you doing? And today, I have a beautiful, awesome, fantastic guest. Her name is Candace Craw Goldman. Hi, Candace. How are you doing?
Hi, Keiko. I'm doing wonderfully well today. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity to have this beautiful, amazing moment together. I really appreciate it. By the way, I love your background, the beautiful brick wall, and the selenite lamp. I love it.
Thank you so much. I'm recording with you today in my wellness studio here in Augusta, Kansas, and this is one of the older buildings here in town. And I've really felt, I've been here now for about 4 years, and I think actually these bricks hold on to some of the healing energies that have happened here in the studio, and I just love coming here.
That is amazing, and we are going to go over about her BQH course in a minute, but I also followed this entire course, BQH. I officially finished entire course, and quite a lot of Candace videos. I saw this beautiful brick wall, and I was wondering, wow, this is so beautiful. Is that her house? I didn't even know it was your office. So.
Yeah. So happy to be in this place. It's been many things over the years, a little store and a factory and some other things like that, but now it's my little wellness studio.
That's beautiful. So, okay, Candace, a lot of viewers, so except my Japanese community, by the way, I am from Japan, and I have a beautiful spiritual small community in Japan. And but I'm going to post this video on both my Japanese community and my tiny, tiny English community, English channel. So probably if you are English speaker, you already know Candace. But I like Candace to introduce herself briefly. So what I know about her is she's an amazing hypnotherapist. She was a director and founder of Quantum Healing Forum, and she has been practicing QHHT and quantum hypnosis for over 10 years, 12 plus years, I think. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, about that long.
She was supporting and she was an assistant of Dolores Cannon when she was here on this planet Earth. Now she already ascended before us. But could you please introduce yourself in your own words, please, a little bit?
Sure, I would love to do that. And I actually really love the idea that the wonderful people of Japan may get to say hello to me today, because it wasn't for very long, and it was a long time ago, but I actually lived on the island of Okinawa as a small child. And my earliest memories, my very earliest memories, some of my foundational memories of my human life happened in Okinawa. So, and writing, and I have, there's a lot of genuine heart affection for the Japanese people. I mean, I made myself a cup of tea even here before talking with you today, and I look forward to returning someday. And not only that, but my healing practice started with Reiki. I mean, you know, it was 1999, and I was facing a health crisis of my own, and I had been to so many doctors, and I had tried so many different things, and nobody knew what to do with me, and it was nothing life-threatening in that way. It was nothing terminal, but it was very painful. I had painful body conditions that were moving around and affecting different parts of my body, and I just kept going to doctor after doctor. And then I just discovered Reiki. And that was right, you know, 1999, 2000, that was right when Reiki was making its way to America in a way that wasn't prohibitively expensive. And I thought, this is amazing. And I immediately took all my levels and learned as much about Reiki as I could. And then I was just an artist. I was artist, photographer. This is my painting. You know, I was a mother, an artist, a photographer. I wasn't interested in being a healer for others. I quite frankly was just trying to heal myself.
I see.
And Reiki became an integral part of my life in my family. I found that I was doing Reiki every day on myself, my children, my animals, people in my community. And then, wow, that's giving me goosebumps. And so, but I still was just being a wife and mother. And then something else happened later. And that was that I was a photographer in Texas. I was in Austin, Texas, loving everything about life there, but really still struggling with my body. Reiki was wonderful, but it didn't completely heal me or solve the root cause of my problems. It was a great comfort. It was a great assistance. It helped me live, no question. And it solved a lot of other people's problems and animals' problems, but I was still kind of struggling. And I had this big photo shoot set up, and I had to cancel it because I was physically unable to show up for it. And it was this famous musician, and I felt just terrible. I felt like a loser. I felt like a failure. And I had what ended up to be, you know, the dark night of my soul. And I had this profound spiritual experience, just laying in bed, praying and meditating about, I just need to do something differently. And I did something differently. I actually, instead of like asking for help, I didn't ask for help that day. That day I asked for something different. And what I asked for different was, I must need to do something else because whatever I'm doing hasn't worked really. What am I supposed to do? So I didn't say like, please heal me, please fix me, please make me healthy, to whomever was going to listen. I said, what am I supposed to do? That made all the difference in the world. I had a profound spiritual experience. And the bottom line of that experience was I was told to do 3 things. And one of those 3 things was to have a past life regression. And the very next day in my mailbox was a book that was mailed to me by a friend, and it was a Dolores Cannon book.
Wow.
And in that book, she said, you know, maybe you'd want to take one of her classes. And I'm like, who's this person? What does she teach? Well, she teaches, and it wasn't even called QHHT back then. It was called Dolores Cannon's Method of Past Life Regression. Wow. And I looked, and I read a little bit of the book, and I called up the person on the phone over there in Arkansas. This was back in 2008. And, you know, at the time they were just opening it up to what they called helpers. So, you know, when Dolores first taught her class, she would only teach to hypnotherapists. And then she just was opening it up to people who, like me, hey, I'm a Reiki practitioner. And they went, you qualify. And I went, that's great. And so several weeks went by. And that's when I knew that Dolores, in her classes, she picks somebody to be the subject for a practice regression in her courses.
Wow.
And that's when I went, that's going to be me. I mean, months before I was even supposed to go, I knew it. I knew it in my heart. It was going to be me.
Wow.
And big things started happening in my body as I was getting ready to finally go to Arkansas. And all of these crazy magical things were happening to get me there. It's a long, long story. I won't go into every detail, but it was magical. And when I got there, and there was like 30 people in the class, maybe 35, and I watched as a great number of those people put their name on the list of volunteers. I would volunteer to be your practice student. She said, you know, if you want to volunteer, I'm making a list. She had a little notebook right there. And I did this thing within inside of me. Oh, Keiko, it was torture almost, but I did this thing. So you know what I did? I did not put my name on the list. I did not do it. And inside I thought, I'm testing God, which felt terrible, or I'm testing the universe, or I'm doing something. But I thought, no, if she picks me, even though I do not put my name on that list, my life will change. And I know that this is my path. And that I watched like 30 of the 35 people put their name on this list. You know, of course, who wants to have a session with the great Dolores Cannon? I did not. And it came time for her to choose who to do the session with. And she said, well, I usually take, I look at my list over here, and then I see which name shines brightly. And I know that's the one they want me to pick. But the person they want me to pick did not put their name on this list. So, and she stands up and she walks down the room and she stands right next to my desk and she says, so Candace, I have to ask you, would you be our test subject? And I just burst out crying. I burst out crying. I could cry right now.
I can cry too.
Everything changed. Everything changed in my life at that point because I believed in magic. You know, I believed in magic, and magic happened to get me there. Magic happened in the class. Magic happened in my session. And I've done nothing more than follow that magic every day since then. And so that's how I got here. And I've been doing QHHT and BQH now for, more than a decade.
You really gave me chill, Candace. I'm serious. And everything was all scripted in a good way, positive, soul contract.
Yeah.
Dolores, Candace, and for all the humanities, all the people who are following BQH, QHHT, it was all destined.
Yeah.
Wow.
The higher self had told me in the session that one of the reasons I was having this continual problem with my body was I wasn't quite on the right path yet.
Yeah.
And it was then finally taking Reiki and then finally taking Dolores's class that put me on the right path. And all of those things with my body just faded away.
Completely healed.
Yeah. Now, not instantaneously, although in my session, my higher self did say we will work on the healing, but she needs to do, and then it gave me lists of things to do. And I sat up after that session. Oh, I was a little brat. I don't know if there's a word brat in Japanese, but I was a little brat to Dolores right away after sitting up, because I started asking questions that, you know, didn't quite make a lot of sense. And I think in the way that she had talked about, because she talked about instantly healing, and I'm like, I still hurt. And she also talked about somnambulism and, you know, people not remembering their sessions. I remembered everything. As a matter of fact, I even said, you know, she said, well, how much do you remember, Candace? And I went, I remember everything. I remember more than what I even said to you. And she played it down, but I was a brat. And I was devil's advocate. It's also another thing I like to say. I would ask questions all the time. And I think Dolores, you know, she got to where she kind of liked that. She liked my spunk of asking questions. And that is how I ended up beginning the support forum, because I had so many questions and she was not available to answer them. And she finally said, well, if you start on a community, then, and if you run it, then I'll give you my blessing. Wow. So that's how we started the original Quantum Healing Support Forum community back then in 2008. And we're bigger and better than ever, and we've expanded. So some of our practitioners are QHHT, some are BQH, some are Reiki or mediums or life coaches or yoga teachers or any. We've opened our doors to a larger community, and we've really broadened our thinking as well about you know, moving into the new earth. The practitioner these days, we're a little different than what we were 10 years ago. We're more awake. We're more individual, and we approach things a little differently than we did in the 90s and in the early 2000s.
Early 2000s. So, okay, you are both, okay, you are, Candace, you are founder of BQH. And you used to practice QHHT. And could you please describe if there is any, the difference between QHHT and BQH?
Oh, sure. Well, BQH is based on the same kind of foundation that QHHT and introspective hypnosis and, you know, Alba Weinman, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, any and all of these people use a relaxation, use usually a past life regression model, at least begins that. All of these methods are similar in that way, including BQH. And I love QHHT, and I still do QHHT sessions here in my wellness studio when I'm guided or when my clients want exactly that. But one of the things that has changed as we have moved into, you know, 2017, 2018 timeframe is there's an expansion of a lot of, again, individuals, but bigger things. So where there's restrictions and rules and limitations in many of these methods, BQH has done something different that, quite frankly, I haven't really seen out there in any other healing modality of any kind, which is basically here, we'll teach you how to do something, but we're going to make it this basic foundation, this basic framework. We're going to tell you how to do everything, but then we're going to say, change any part of it that you want, any part of it. Change the script, change the order, change how you do something, change how you approach your client, bring in Reiki, bring in sound healing, do it online, do it any way that resonates with you and resonates with your client and keeps the safety and the well-being and the goals of your client uppermost in your mind. Forget about any rules, forget about any guidelines, because it's time finally to trust our own inner guru, our own inner self. We don't need anybody else telling us exactly what to do anymore. Our wisdom is within us. And a lot of people want and like the guidelines, at least to begin with. And that's great. But once you get your feet wet, you might find that you like to change things. And BQH is all about giving you permission and encouraging you and celebrating your individuality as a healer.
That is beautifully stated. Thank you so much, Candace. So BQH is more like spontaneous and requires your own inner guidance and intuitions. You have to be maybe you have to explore your inner guidance yourself, and then you have to be more like use your intuitions.
Yes. Let me tell you, there's a story I tell sometimes that, and I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now. It was very integral to BQH, here that was being developed here in the year of 2018. But this happened in 2009. So I showed up the next year after taking my initial course with Dolores. I showed up the very next year, 2009, for her. And at the time, it was just a one day, you just sat in a room and asked Dolores questions. It was just Q&A questions. Now, there was a fella who'd sat next to me in my original course, and he also returned the next year. And this guy was much older than I was, and he had been a practicing hypnotherapist for 25 years. And he was just starting to look at this woo-woo stuff, right? And he was sitting in the classroom before this level 2 even started. And he said, Candace, how has it been for you? He really didn't participate much on our support forum, even though it was going. Some people do and some people don't, and that's okay. But he asked me how my sessions were. And I related some of, what was going on, some of my questions, but also some of my incredible stories and successes. And he just was looking at me and he said, well, I tried it for a while. I tried it for a while as an experiment, but I never had anything like what you were talking about. I would really, I tested it and I questioned it and I tried it out and it just didn't work. And what that man was showing me, what that man was expressing and illustrating so beautifully was he sat in those sessions kind of as a spoiler. I don't think inside he was saying to himself, I don't think this is going to work, or I'm not sure about this, or this is really weird, but so his internal scape, his energy that he held within him, it was like a chemistry experiment. And we talk about this in BQH. So he sat in these sessions going, I don't know about this thing. I mean, he wasn't saying it, right? But his energy was questioning, and it was doubtful, and it was skeptical. And his clients may have been, I don't know, I have no idea who his clients were. His clients may be, yeah, okay, I'll try it. Or I don't know how, but those two energy forces together equaled not so much outcome, right? So that's when I really started understanding that far more than number of years of practicing or number of clients, far more important is the heart and the energy that a practitioner feels within themselves when they want to help somebody. Because I've sat many, many beginning courses with Dolores and with BQH practitioners where seeing people do their very first session, magic happens. Why? Because they're ready for magic. They believe in magic. They think this is amazing. Their client is excited. And those two things together produce sometimes jaw-dropping results. So that's how and why BQH talks about intention, setting the intention, and frequency and energy that you carry, and even some of your own silent thoughts that you might be having in a session. Because if your client is whatever they're doing, laying there, what you think to yourself internally, you must understand affects the energy in the room, affects the session with your client. So BQH is as much about dealing with yourself in a session as it is dealing with your client.
Wow. Yeah, so not only BQH, I think any type of energy healings, energy modalities, the practitioners, the healers, we have to be genuine for what we are doing, and we also have to have faith. We have to have passion, compassion, and faith. The belief that it's it's working. The energy is transmuting, and then it is working. Otherwise, even most powerful healing modalities, practitioner or healers themselves can block that from going to the client. I really feel that. Okay, Candace. So QHHT, as far as I know, the QHHT is still solely for one-on-one in-person sessions. And the BQH, like you said earlier, you can do online. You can reach out to any clients, any people throughout the world. And then also, I heard that you mentioned earlier too, not only online sessions. How about the surrogate sessions? Could you please explain about surrogate sessions?
Yes, I can. Now, we didn't cover surrogate sessions, not really in the foundational course, because it, as you were saying even before we started this interview, there's a lot of information there, but we absolutely will be doing this. But it's also one of the reasons why I did create BQH. So I'll tell you a story on how that all came to be. So those of you who know QHHT or have heard Dolores speak, Dolores did teach very briefly a surrogate way of using QHHT. And the way she would teach it is she would say, well, it was usually the mother, sometimes the spouse, but a relative, somebody close to whoever couldn't have a session. For whatever reason, sometimes people can't have sessions. They may be too young, they may be too infirm, there may be in a coma. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but the person then would assume or connect the session in a way that it would assist the person that they were having a session for. And so QHHT still does that, and that's beautiful, and it's fine. And it's, of course, where I'm learning how and why some of this happens. But some of us out there in QHHT land, we were experimenting in a lot of ways that Dolores herself was not experimenting. And Dolores actually really, when she was alive, did not approve of some of these things. And one of the things, but that didn't mean we couldn't and didn't experiment. And so we did. So one of the things that we were doing, some of us, was a surrogate session where nobody who was even involved in whatever situation or the client was involved in the session itself. So let me explain. So I live here in rural Kansas, and there's one or two practitioners kind of in the area, but I stay very busy. And but I'm mostly, my community's online, and my father and my mother both. This was, I think, about in the year 2015, maybe 2016. They were both quite ill. They were in their 80s. And at one time, my mother with congestive heart failure, my father with a condition called COPD. And they were both on oxygen. They were both at home, but they were both on oxygen 24/7. As a matter of fact, they would walk, mother on her walker and father across the house, and their lines, would get mixed up because the machines were going, and that was how they were breathing. And it was hard. They were still at home, and I checked on them all the time, but it was still very, very hard. And I wanted to do a session for both mother and father, but both of them could not manage this for medication reasons. And for my father, he was a fighter pilot. That's actually how and why I was in Japan. He, as a young fighter pilot, was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base there in Okinawa. But he has ears, with the jet engines. He just doesn't hear very well. And he was not a candidate for a session. And I had two friends who live in Oklahoma, and they together, both of them were practitioners. They were friends of mine, quantum healers, and both of them together decided to do a session to benefit my father. So one of the people laid down, her name is Laura, and Laura laid down and assumed the energy stream in the life of my father. And the other one is Joni, and Joni then had the session with Laura. But they, you know, it's something completely outside of QHHT parameters. So, you know, we wrote it down, we figured out a way of doing it. And so this is spawning BQH, right? But several years ago as a practice. And so Laura lays down, Joni does a session on Laura. Laura says, you know, she intends, there we go with the intention again, excuse me. She intends to join with the energy stream of my father and do a session to benefit my father. And what I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about telling you this story. It's still so amazing. So, it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So she immediately goes to a life, and guess what? She goes to a life where the man, she's a man, and he's a soldier, just like my dad in this life, you know. He's an Air Force pilot, but he's a soldier in this life. And in this war, he happens, probably World War I, but you know, I'm not going to say exactly detail-wise. It doesn't matter. But he's captured by whoever, you know, the enemy is, and he's put into a chamber, a gas chamber. But he actually escapes the gas chamber. But the whole thing is about him being a soldier and his lungs being affected by gas. And so they go through the session just like a regular session, a past life session. They ask for healing. The higher self talks in a larger sense about all of the implications and carryovers of this past life. Can we have this, you know, can he release this? Because he would like to be able to breathe in this life. Keiko, the next day, he pulled off the oxygen and he's not used it since. It's been years. He doesn't need oxygen anymore. He does not need oxygen anymore. And my dad, who was still a little, you know, he was brought up differently than me, and he was always very supportive of me, but had no clue about what I'm doing, no clue about Dolores, none of that. He was just like, okay, whatever it is you do, good for you, you know. And I'm like, well, we're going to try this. He's like, sure, try that with anything. And then the next day, he just could breathe. And I said, well, how are you feeling? He's like, I'm different. I can breathe. I feel so much better. And so then he started saying things like, those ladies healed me. And I'm like, wait a second, because, you know, as quantum healers, we know that this is a higher self agreement, and they didn't heal him. This was simply communication. He allowed it. It was this session. It worked beautifully for them, brought them up in a few weeks' time. And my dad's just astonished. And let me tell you what happened then, because it gets better. My mother is still on her machine because she has congestive heart failure. And she wants some of that, right? She says, can those ladies heal me too? You know, and I'm still saying, wait a second, Mom, it's not exactly how it works and whatever. But guess what? They do a session then several months later for my mother. And I said, because Mom, it's different. Dad has COPD, you have congestive heart failure. And she had her condition for many, many years, much longer than my father. And she also, I love my mother. She's since passed. And I know she forgives me for saying this, but she was very stubborn, and well, they both were, but she's very difficult. She sometimes can be very negative. I wasn't sure how it was going to work. I mean, we never know. We just never know. And I said, sure, Mom, let's ask Laura and Joni to do a session for you. Keiko, the same thing happened. Same thing happened the next day. The next day, my mother could breathe. And she went on and off oxygen for a while, and then she left it off. Same thing. She didn't do it quite as dramatically, but she ended up turning the machine off. She didn't have the machine. But something even bigger happened with my mother than the machine. She stopped being so negative. She was towards the end of her life. Now, this is the kind of healing that she had. I want everyone to understand this, because healing doesn't always mean you take somebody she was 89 years old at the time. She did not become an athlete, okay? She did not, she was still infirm. But she was able to turn the machine off. She turned the oxygen machine off after having been on it for years. She was able to do that. But she still had congestive heart failure, but she became less negative. She became pleasant. And wouldn't you know it, that was in January of 2016. And in May of 2016, my mother suffered a stroke. And she didn't pass away immediately. It was several weeks later, about 3 weeks later, she passed away from complications due to the stroke. But from January until the time that she passed, was one of the most beautiful times of my mother's life. And she was loving and approachable. And even during the aftermath of her stroke, she was beautiful. And the last thing she said to me was, "I love you." And the last thing I said to her was, "I love you," as I was doing Reiki on her as she was passing. And I know that quantum healing session that she had, that surrogate session she had in January, healed her, right? It doesn't mean it extended her life and made her invincible and, you know, gonna live forever. She did not. But I also know that that session made the last few months of her life extraordinary. And it was one of the most beautiful healings I've ever seen. So did it heal her congestive heart failure? Oh no, you know, no. But she got off the machine, dropped the negativity, and she exited her life in peace.
In peace. Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing us, Candace. It's so beautiful, almost made me cry. I think that your mom's, that was her decision to transition, to probably ascend past earlier than we do, right? And it's death is people think, well, you know, you didn't survive, you just couldn't win the battle of the illnesses and you die, they die. If death is not a, you know, sad thing, death is not something to really, you know, cry for or feel sorry for. This is my own opinion, but death is a beautiful thing for me. And death is you know, nothing but just a transition and go on to the next journey. And your mother was able to enjoy the last few months of her life, probably the best one of the best moments of her life, and with her family members. And she was happy, and she was fully ready to go on to the next journey. That was beautiful.
Thank you. I have a fun Dolores story to go with this. So somewhere after January, but before her stroke, I was visiting, and I was there, and we had during small amounts of the day, there was a lady who would come and help in the house, and I got there. My mother would sleep very late. I got there right as she was waking up, and she came and sat at the breakfast table, and she looked at me and she goes, and she asked me and the caregiver lady, whose name was Robin, you know, Robin, who was the lady who was here last night? And I looked over at Robin, and Robin's like, and I knew, you know, I'm like, well, what are you talking about, Mom? And she said, well, some lady came into my room last night. And I said, really? And I said, well, what did she say? And you know, Mom, again, you know, medicine and infirm and not really remembering everything. And she sat and thought for a moment. She goes, well, I don't know what she said, but I know it was very, very important. I'm going to try to remember what she said, but for some reason I just can't remember, but I do remember her just standing there. And I said, oh, and I said, Mom, do you remember what her name was? And she said, no, and she went back to eating her toast and tea. And then she said this, which was just, I love this story. She goes, I'm not sure, but I think her name was Doris. And what's funny about my mother is, if anyone who knew her throughout her life, she would always get somebody's name just a little bit wrong, just a little bit wrong. And I'm thinking, boy, and so then later, sometimes in sessions or in my own meditations, I've been able to communicate with Dolores after she transitioned. And I said, Dolores, I said, did you visit my mother? And she really laughed. And she said, she said, I've known your mother more lifetimes than I've known you. And that's all she would say. And I thought that was such a gift too. So, they may even be working together now, for all I know.
Yes, I think they are listening to our conversation.
I think they are.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, okay, I have a question. It's either any type of quantum hypnosis, quantum hypnosis therapies, or past life regressions. So, I also heard, I have never tried myself, either BQH or QHHT as of yet. I will. But so some of my, for example, people in my Japanese spiritual communities, and also I've heard or I've read in a spiritual community here in the US. So not everybody or not many people can go into under the hypnosis. You say somnambulistic states.
Yeah.
So people who are not even be able to go under, so they still can have profound healings and some profound experiences by just having one session.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of misconceptions here. A lot of it has to do with TV and stage hypnosis. And quite frankly, she knows I love her, but Dolores herself made this difficult because she would say, I take my clients to the somnambulistic state. And here's the thing, some of them would go to the somnambulistic state. They did. And some of my clients go to the somnambulistic state, but not everybody does. As a matter of fact, people who've listened to me in interviews before have heard me say this. I was regressed by Dolores Cannon. And one of the first questions she asked me when I sat up was, how much do you remember? Because it was in a class. And she was kind of trying to prove a point that I wasn't going to remember. And I'm like, I remember everything. I remember more than I even told you. I remember specific details. But at the same time, I also knew what was going on in the room. I could hear paper crunching over here. I could hear somebody coughing. I could